Welcome everyone to New South Wales DPI Dairy's webinar number 11, AMS KPI Project, Monitoring Commercial AMS Farms. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Nicolas Lyons. I am the Development Officer Dairy within the New South Wales Department of Primary Industries, and I will be your presenter today. My position is a national role supporting technology adoption on Australian dairy farms with a particular focus, but not limited, to robotic milking systems. As a bit of a background, I hold a Bachelor of Ag Science from a university in Argentina and a PhD in Vet Science from the University of Sydney. I've got a strong orientation towards dairy science and use of technology on dairy systems. Basically, all my working life, I have been involved in the dairy industry, both in Australia and overseas, working in public and private organizations. Today's webinar will cover the initial preliminary analysis of data from a 2-year project that we've run within New South Wales DPI. So a bit of a background of the project and the aim that we tried to cover with this project. What was the gap that we had identified in early 2015? First, conventional farmers wanted to know what was the performance of commercial operations. Oops, sorry for that. And AMS farmers needed to identify which were the AMS KPIs they needed to monitor and understand how they related and how to manipulate those KPIs. So what was the aim of this project? First, to capture key performance indicators or KPIs related to farm demographics, milk production, and AMS utilization, and then understand current but also potential system performance. So what did we do? This project has 2 phases. We started in year 1 in July 2015, monitoring 9 commercial farms in Australia in what was named the Australian AMS KPI Project. After 1 year of that project, 100% of the farms involved in the project expressed a benefit in participating, and 75% mentioned that the monthly reports they received allowed them to have more control of their business and take better decisions. What were the positive aspects that they highlighted? The comparison of farms on a monthly basis, the evolution of the farm on a month-to-month, and that the individual report was in a format that was easy to see and understand. So all of these systems had software working with the robots, but they highlighted of participating in these projects that the comparison of farms, of their farm with other farms, and the evolution of the farms on a month-to-month was easy to understand and easy to act upon. So we monitored the farms from July 2015 till June 2016, and given these positive results, we decided to expand the project, and there's where we went on year 2 to the International AMS KPI Project, where we monitored 19 farms. So the initial 9 farms were 9 Australian farms. We then moved to year 2, where we monitored 19 farms. So 12 in Australia, 2 in New Zealand, 4 in Ireland, and 1 in Chile. So the idea was to expand the project and understand different farm situations. What was the methodology of this project? On a monthly basis, we extracted reports and data from these 9 or 19 farms. So from day 1 to day 5 of every month, we extracted the reports and the data for the previous month. So from 1 to 5, let's say, of November, we were extracting reports for October. Extracting these reports and this data allowed us to generate a list of KPIs for that previous month. We analyzed those KPIs, sent the reports to the participating farms before day 10 of every month, and if everything was okay, before day 10, all those results were posted online and distributed through the New South Wales DPI Dairy newsletter. So this information was available to everyone that wanted to access, only that the farmers that were participating had a bit more detail and were able to compare their farms to the other farms. So a bit about the participating farms. We had in year 2 or the data that I'm comparing today in this preliminary analysis, we had 1 farm with 1 robot, 3 farms with 2 robots, 8 farms with 3 robots, 5 farms with 4 robots, 1 farm with 6 robots, and 2 farms with robotic rotaries. So a big spread of sizes and type of robots. The farms were operating anywhere between 5 months and 6 years. So they were not all new farms and they were not all old farms. There was again a spread in how many months or years these farms had been operating. Most of them were milking Holsteins and crossbreeds, but we had also Jerseys and we had also different crossbreeds. 7 farms had seasonal calving systems, 8 had split calving either in 2 or 3 batches, and 5 farms had a year-round calving pattern. So again, a big spread in farming types. But almost all of them, 19 out of 20, were pasture-based, having access to supplementary feed and sometimes access to out-of-parlour feeders or feeders, and the farms having between no and 16 feeders in the dairy. So again, a big spread of the systems that were available for analysis in this project. So what were some of the results that we saw? General results. Almost all farms manage either 3 or 4 allocations per 24 hours, but increasingly we were seeing 4 allocations being offered in a 24-hour period, particularly in Australia. So traditionally in the early days, farmers were managing 2 allocations, what we call two-way grazing or AB grazing. Today, most of the farms were managing 30 allocations or ABC grazing, but we were starting to see a trend to what we call 4-way grazing or ABCD grazing. The other surprising thing was that almost all farms changed gate times as part of their monthly routine. So it was not very common to see one farm that kept the gate times from month to month. They tended to change the access and fetching times depending on pasture availability, number of allocation, number of hours of daylight that were available at one particular time. So again, farmers were able to adapt and play with this as the season progressed. So then I divided a bit the results in kind of 3 results: farm performance, milking performance, and robot performance, to try to group a bit of what was happening. And this was the result of what happened on a monthly basis on those 20 farms throughout the 2 years. General consensus was there was a wide range in farm performance. So on average, they were milking almost 200 cows, but anywhere between almost 40 and 600 cows. On average, 24% of the animals were heifers, but again, anywhere between 2 and almost 70%. The average was 2.2 milkings, producing almost 24 kilograms of milk with 5.5 kilograms of concentrate, but again, a big range of both of milking frequency, milking yield, and concentrate offered. So there, one surprising thing, there was farms that were offering 0.2 kilograms of concentrate, where others were offering over 11 kilograms of concentrate per cow per day. And one thing that we've seen in the literature and we've seen over again is that there is a difference between either offering and not offering concentrates, but the amount offered had no difference, no impact on the milking frequency. So there was farms in New Zealand offering 200 or 300 grams per cow per month that were able to manage the targets very efficiently, where other farms in Australia particularly were offering higher amounts of concentrate but similar milking frequencies. So digging a bit deeper into these details and what did we see that these farmers were doing. Farmers were achieving a good milk composition and quality with robots, and this was not surprising, but before in the past some literature and some previous experience said that good milk quality was achievable, but in general robots tended to achieve lower components and lower milk quality. What we saw is in this graph here, on the left, fat composition, on the right protein composition, the average was pretty good, around 4%, 4.2% fat and 3.4% protein, with again a range there, basically impacted by season and breed. There were some Jersey breeds doing some high components, and there was some Holstein cows producing large volumes but with lower components. And the same with milk quality. The average somatic cell count was 181,000, but again with a range between 25,000 and 480,000. So you can achieve good milk quality with robots. It goes back again to the basics. When some farmer contacts me or I visit a farm that is not achieving good milk quality, I tend to go back to the basics. What's happening with the environment? So what's happening with laying ways, with cow management? Are the cows standing up or lying down after they exit the dairy with the sphincter open? What's happening in that point of view? Obviously, the robots have an impact. Are the robots functioning properly? Is the vacuum levels or pulsation levels working properly? So again, tend to go to the basics rather than flick all the blame to the robots. There was a range of distribution of milking frequency. So MF stands for milking frequency. This is a graph that shows the distribution of milking frequency as the milking frequency increases. The highest observations were seen for cows milking between 1.8 and 2 milkings per day. Yes, so almost 27% of the milking of the cow observations out of almost 70,000 cow observations showed cows milking between 1.8 and 2. 53% of the cow records had cows milking between 1.2 and 2.4. So yes, you can achieve high milking frequencies, but not all of the farms are achieving high milking frequencies. But we tend to see this relationship that is not linear. It tends to be curvilinear between the higher the milking frequency, the higher the daily milk yield. But again, we have to remember that in robots, the daily milking frequency and the daily milk yield is not always that relevant, because it's a rolling average and the day routine of the cow is not always the same. So you've got to look in general to the 3, 5, or 7 day average to see how these things behave. But in general, the higher milking frequency, the higher the daily milk yield. And that relationship tended to be more linear in the early lactation cows, so the cows in blue, compared to the cows in green that were the late lactation cows with more than 200 days in milk, where the relationship was more curvilinear. But some things that started appearing in the data. The higher the milking frequency, the higher the concentrate intake. So this graph shows what proportion of the ration were the cows consuming on a daily basis. So for cows milking once a day, they were consuming on average around 60% of the ration. So let's say they had on average 5 kilograms, they were consuming, yes, around 3 kilograms per day. But again, a big variation, anywhere between almost 30% and 85%. And that dispersion in data tends to narrow down with the higher milking frequencies. So in general, the higher the milking frequency, the more intake of concentrate cows can have, because they visit the robot or the feeders more regularly, and they're able to eat or consume that ration that the farm manager had established. But always, there will be always a variation within and between cows. But the higher the milking frequency, there tends to be a higher number of incompletes. So we tend to see that here's, for example, whereas the lower number of incompletes was with 2 milkings per day, around 5.5% incompletes, it reached almost 10% with 4 milkings per day. And I tend to explain that because the more, and we see it then when we see the milking yield, if we are milking, let's say, a cow that is producing 20 liters per day, we milk that cow 2 times a day, every time she comes to the dairy, she's got 10 liters of milk in the udder. Whereas if she comes 4 times a day, she's got 5 liters of milk in the udder. So the robot struggles more to find the teats, to attach the cups, and therefore the number of incompletes tends to be higher. So normally, if incompletes tends to be very high and milking frequency tends to be very high, I suggest farmers dropping the milking frequency of those cows that have high incompletes to allow more milk to be in the udder per milking. Especially the back teats will be separated a bit, and it will be easier for the robot to attach, quicker for the robot to attach, and you'll tend to see less incomplete milkings. What happened with milking performance? Again, a big range. On average, the amount of milk for every milking or every time the cow presented in the dairy was around 11 kilograms of milk. The cows spend 6.5 minutes per milking in the box, and they produced, they milked 1.7 kilograms of milk per milking. Again, with a big range. But what did we see with the relationship with milking yield? What we tended to see is that it was not linear, but it tended to increase higher milking yields. So that's the amount of milk that the cow had per milking. So every time she visited the milking robot, the longer the milking time. And this is obvious because it takes more time to harvest that milk from that cow. But again, it was not linear. What we tended to see is that the more milk there was in the udder, the higher the milk flow. So when the cows had roughly 5 kilograms of milk, the average milk flow was 0.5 kilograms per minute, whereas if she had 25 kilograms of milk, that was almost 3 kilograms per minute. So the flow was quicker. So that's why we tend to see a higher milk speed for those higher milk yields. Now we've got to be careful because higher milk speeds were associated in the past with a higher incidence of mastitis. So we need to be careful on how do we manage this. But this was a general relationship we saw in the database. And again, the same that I showed before. The higher the milk yield, the lower the number of incompletes. Because again, there is more milk in the udder, the robot finds it easier to locate the teats, it's quicker to attach the cups, and it's able to attach the cups, especially in the rear teats, and they milk out properly. So for some farms, they need to find where the sweet spot lies for those cows with those milk yields. What happened from the robot utilization point of view? Again, a wide range of variation, but on average, the farms were milking 52 cows per robot, anywhere between 14 and 82, 115 milkings per day, operating over 13 hours per day, harvesting 1,200 kilograms of milk per day. So again, a big variation, but the average were different to the potential that we've read or that we know that these robots can harvest. So then we started to try to dig and understand this a bit better. And this was a paper that we've published in 2016 with Kendra Kerrs, who was the leader of the Future Dairy Project in Australia, where we monitored the number of milkings that occurred at every hour of the day throughout the different seasons of the day. So those seasons are seasons in Australia. So winter is July, August, September. Sorry, June, July, August. Spring is September, October, November. Summer, December, January, February. Autumn, March, April, and May. So we monitored how many milkings did the robots perform. This was in the first year in the Australian KPI project, the 9 farms. We monitored how many milkings on average the robots performed. And on average, we see that pattern, which is not surprising, and it has been described in the past. The peak occurring throughout the day, whereas we see a trough in early hours of the day. So the peak was anywhere around 7 and 8 milkings per day, whereas in early hours of the day, it was between 1 and 4, depending the time of the year. So we see this pattern. So the big question that I had for that paper, and that paper is available for those of you that would like to see it, is what would happen if we are able to manage all the cow traffic to achieve the potential of these robots? How many cows, how many milkings could we achieve? So what we did is we assessed the number of milkings per hour, the number of milkings per day, the number of cows per robot, milk yield per robot, and milking time per robot. Now, and what was the potential? So this tried to understand, okay, for each farm, you are here, but what is your potential for your situation? For your cows producing that amount of milk, where could you be, or how much could you push the system? So we saw that the current average was 5 milkings per hour, 120 milkings per day, 51 cows per robot, 1,200 liters or kilograms per day, operating 13 and 13.6 hours per day. So if we were able to manage cow traffic to achieve the high potential of cow traffic or robot milkings per hour, how much could we achieve? We saw that you could milk 10 cows per hour. That would mean that you could do up to 186 milkings per day, almost 80 cows per robot, almost on average 2,000 kilograms per robot, and slightly under 21 hours per robot. This is not that it was highly surprising, but it was about modeling where were farmers now and where was the potential could be. The next step would be to try to understand how do we help farmers go from the current to the potential situation. But if the farmers achieve the potential situation, what was the impact of this? Basically, they could improve by around 60% the amount of milkings, cows, milk yield per robot, or milking time on farm. So there would be different strategies to be able to achieve this potential, but this meant that for the average farm in Australia at that time, of those 9 farms that had 4 robots, they could do exactly the same job with 3 robots. So that would mean that you would cut the entry cost by almost 25%. So imagine the potential of this is huge. And there is farmers doing this. These are some numbers of one farmer in Australia that he's got a seasonal calving system. In his peak in October, he's milking 226 cows with 3 robots. So that's 75 cows per robot. Remember that the average was 50. Cows are milking 2.3 times a day, producing almost 34 kilograms of milk per cow per day, with only 5.5 kilograms of concentrate. But he does that by achieving. He wants to achieve cows that only have access to the robot when they have over 16 kilograms of milk per milking. So he's milking his cows with 16.7 kilograms of milk. They spend only 6.5 minutes in the robot, giving 2.2 kilograms per minute. So on average, he performs 163 milkings per robot. The robots operate for 21 hours per day, and he harvests almost 2,500 kilograms of milk per robot per day. But look at the graph on milking pattern. He's able to achieve high utilization with a peak in early hours of the day, partly explained by cow traffic, partly explained by the washing here and here. But this is highly comparable and sometimes better than many indoor systems. He's achieved days of 3,000 kilograms per robot. So it is doable in a grazing system to achieve these things. We've got to be able as an industry to try to be able to help farmers achieve this. However, what do we need to take care? That with more cows per robot, we might be impacting different things. So this is one graph that shows for cows and heifers how things change when we put more cows in the system. So on the left here, we have heifers, on the right, cows. When we go from less than 60 cows per robot to more than 60 cows per robot in red, the heifers drop by 0.3 the milking frequency, whereas cows drop by, drop by 0.2 the milking frequency. So both heifers and cows drop the milking frequency. What impact does this have on yield? The heifers drop milk yield by almost a kilogram per day, whereas the cows are able to step up and milk more, and although they milk less frequently, they give slightly higher milk yield, daily yield. So again, we might be affecting heifers when we push the system, and heifers showed underperformance when we monitored this. On average, they were performing around 70% of the cows, with farmers ranging between 50 and 86% of the mature cows. The target is that heifers should be performing, well-grown heifers and managed heifers should be producing 80% of the mature herd mates. Here they were producing under that. So we need to be able to manage heifers better. And that is, how do we manage pushing the system here, but also how do we train and grow our heifers? So maximizing robot performance. What were the characteristics of farms that had either more cows per robot, either more milkings per robot, or more yield per robot? Farms that had high robot stocking rate, so more than 60 cows per robot, in general tended to have a better reproduction, so cows with lower days in milk, and lower milking frequency. So they were not pushing milking frequency very high. They were sitting between 2 and 2.1, 2.2, but they were able to put more cows. But they had higher milk yield and higher box time. So lower milking frequency, but every time the cows came to be milked, they gave more milk and therefore spent slightly higher box time. And this is a matter of efficiency, because every time the cow comes to the robot, there's a fixed time and a variable time. The fixed time is the time it takes for the robot to open the gate, allow the cow in, identify the cow, and the robot perform certain tasks. But then there's a variable time, that is the time it takes the robot to locate the teats, attach the cups, milk the cow. And that is dependent on the milk yield. So again, it's how do we optimize robot performance. The farmers that were achieving high robot milkings, again, had lower days in milk and lower box times, but had, in general, higher number of heifers, higher milking frequency, and higher number of incompletes. So a great proportion of those milkings were due to incomplete milkings and cows coming around again. The farmers that were achieving high robot yields, so over 2,000 kilograms per robot, had again a lower number of days in milk, lower incompletes, but higher daily yield and high milk flow. But again, this had big changes throughout the year, and this is modeling the 9 farms that were present both years in the project. So the 9 farms that are Australian farms. If you look at what happens with the number of cows per robot, it's variable throughout the year. So it starts somewhere around less than 45 cows, 40, 42 cows. It goes up to about 60, and then it drops back. And this relates to the daily yield of the cow, with most of the systems being seasonal calving systems. But again, the milking frequency doesn't change much. It tends to sit 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, so it's not much variable throughout the year. So each farm has to find the sweet spot for where they should be sitting. Some inefficiencies that we found at cow level. Out of the almost 70,000 monthly records from individual cows that represented around 6,000 cows, there are slightly over 5,000 cows that have at least 5 records in the database. So looking at only these 5,000 cows, what happens with the incomplete milkings? 0.6% of the cows have more than 50% of incomplete milkings, with cows having up to 88% of incomplete milkings. This is huge. Trying to manipulate these cows, or eventually culling these cows, is something that farmers should be focusing. Yes, it represents only 0.6% of the cows that have systematically more than half of the milkings incomplete. But if we look at the target should be below 10%, 20% of the cows have more than 10% incomplete milkings. So again, farmers should be focusing on this. And there's two things. There is robot maintenance and how clean the robots are for me, but also how to manipulate milking frequency, because there might be an effect there. So we're trying to push milking frequency, having a negative effect of an incomplete milkings. Milking time, 3.5% of cows have more than 10 minutes average in the box. So we saw that the average was around 6. 3.5 have more than 10 minutes, with cows having systematically an average of 18 minutes. Again, these are cows tying up the box for long periods of time. So we should be looking at these efficiencies if trying to push the system. Concentrate intake. 1.3% of cows are not eating not even 50% of the ration, with cows eating on average 10%. So we might be underfeeding certain cows or thinking that on average you're feeding good, but some cows are not feeding the amount that we want to feed those cows. So look at what's happening at an individual. Milking frequency. Almost 2% of cows have less than 1.5 milkings, with cows having 1.1. Again, this is not necessarily a problem, and every farmer will have to assess what's the milking frequency they need to have to satisfy the targets. But I suspect that some cows are not being milked to their potential, and a lot of them are heifers. And a lot of that relates to the size of the heifers and the training and the confidence that those heifers have. Daily yield. 1% of cows have an average daily yield of less than 10 kilograms, with farms having 6.1 kilograms per day. Look at individual cows. And milk flow, that relates again to box time. Almost 8% of cows have less than 1 kilograms per minute. Slow milkers, some milking 0.3 kilograms per minute, and a lot of that relating to the amount of milk that they are giving per milking. So again, these things are going to have to be looked at by individual farmers to be able to optimize the system. And then I'll tell you a bit of what are we looking at, looking into the future. But we are playing with these cow efficiencies at a cow, herd, and farm level. So what are the outcomes of this project? We've come up with some interactive benchmarking tools. Excuse me, I'll flick a second. It's an Excel-based sheet today that we're looking at developing further into a tool. But basically, this was available to all AMS farmers, a basic description of the tabs and how this Excel file works, a description of the participating farms and what characteristics they had and where were they, the definition of all the KPIs and how they were calculated, but then this evolution of graphs. So they were able to select from the drop-down menu of the farms. So for example, if you were farm 2, you were able to compare your farm with all the Australian farms or with all the farms in the project and see how you were tracking. And these were by some default KPIs here, but you could change them. Instead of showing, for example, robot stocking rate, you could choose daily milk production per herd, or concentrate ration, or milk harvested per kilo per robot per day. So you could start playing with this, and this shows you the evolution of how you were performing, but also how the farm that you were comparing. So for example, if you were farm 2, but you liked farm 4, you could compare farm 2 with farm 4 and see what were they achieving comparing to you. So this is a useful tool that not all the farms have, because they do all have the software where they are using, but not always able to compare how they track in time and how other farms are performing. This also had a monthly table, so they were able to complete and select a particular month on farms to compare. So for example, go back to, let's say, January and compare all farms and all Australian farms, or again, farm 2 with all Australian farms, and you had here how they were performing in the table, all the numbers per se. And if you were not an KPI AMS farmer, you were able to select a farm against which farm you wanted to compare, and then you enter the number. So for example, you said, okay, I want to compare for June against farm 4 that I like, and I said, okay, this is my farm, and I want to say, okay, I had, I don't know, daily milk production per cow, 24 kilograms. And then it tells you how much you compared against farm 4. So it's a tool that was available for farmers. I can now go back to the PowerPoint. So this was available to the farmers. The second tool that we came up, and this is available to the industry on our website, is what we call the KPI Target and Impact tool. That's a list of all the KPIs, how's the definition, what's the common target, and what factors related to cow factors, system factors, or equipment factors impact on this KPI. So for example, if you were low on milking frequency, you could start looking at these things. We are now looking at doing this in a dynamic tool. So what does the future hold for the AMS KPI project, or AMS in general? We're working on a national project together with CSIRO, that is a federal research organization in Australia. They have what is called Data 61, that is a data analytics center, to be able to continue this AMS initiative, automate the data collection process, which will allow us to scale this. So for example, get data not only once per month, but every week, not only for 20 farms, but to all the farms in Australia, the 41 farms that are operating, or for any farm in the world that wants to, and be able to improve the data analytics. We want to be able to provide guidance on how to improve farm, robot, and system performance. So a farmer will be able to set a what-if scenario or a target and see how to manipulate KPIs and be able to look this. And why not add more KPIs? So this is something that we're looking at developing into the future. So as a conclusion, we were able to establish a baseline of farm, cow, and robot performance on commercial farm. There is a huge variation both within and between farms. There is a potential to improve utilization and performance of cows, systems, and robots. We've identified some areas for improvement. We've been able to show an example of how to use data to guide decision. And we've developed 2 tools, the interactive benchmark tool, that is that Excel file that we're looking to develop into another tool, and the KPI target and impact tool, that now again, we are looking at a dynamic platform. So this is what we've done so far. So I would like to thank you very much for your attention and open the floor for questions. There is one question that came through that is saying, are you saying that 4 times milking per day cow will only produce 20 liters? Likely much higher, I would have thought. Yes, that was just an example to show you that if the cow produces 20 liters of milk, if you milk her 4 times a day, she produces 5 liters per milking. If you milk her twice a day, she gives 10 liters per milking. Obviously, you've got to think that if we're milking more frequently, we would expect an improvement in daily yield. Is there any other question that you would like to ask regarding the project or the data? So somebody asked, do all the AMS farmers have access to the benchmarking tool? If not, how can they have access to this software? So that's a tool that so far has only been available to the farmers of the KPI project and to all the Australian farmers, given my national role, but it is available to farmers that are interested in that tool. It's only looking at data of 2000, so from July 2015 till June 2017, but anybody that would like to access it, it is there. We are now looking to kind of change from that Excel based to more a software or a website or something like that. But yes, in short answer, it is available. I'll try to unmute all. If anybody wants to make a question, feel free to make it. Okay, if there's no other questions, but if any question tends to come up, and if you want to ask any question, just feel free to flick me an email. My email is there on the screen. It's available for anybody that wants to contact me regarding anything related to technology or AMS. As with all our webinars, this webinar has been recorded and will become available on the New South Wales DPI Dairy website. For those of you that were not aware, we also have a New South Wales DPI Dairy Facebook page that is called exactly like that, New South Wales DPI Dairy, which is followed by almost 1,000 people from all around the world, and a newsletter which is sent out 3 times a year to more than 450 subscribers all around the world. So last edition was this October. The next edition comes out in January. So feel free to join these initiatives to stay updated on all the work that we do in the areas of precision dairy farming. They're excellent tools and resources. So for more information, I encourage you all to visit the New South Wales Department of Primary Industries website, where you will be able to access tools and resources about the dairy industry. There is a specific section on precision dairy farming, which includes a lot of information on not only robotic milking, but also precision dairy farming. So once again, thank you all very much for joining today. I hope you found it useful and hope to see you all next time. Thank you very much.